Decades in the making, it's a plan to take down the greatest obstacle to totalitarianism the world has ever known, the United States. And it's a plan that will succeed unless we unite now to save America. Welcome to Freedom Alive. Incompetence or intent, it seems so much is going wrong in America. Some say it's because our leaders are incompetent. Others think it's merely a coincidence. But to millions of concerned Americans, those simplistic explanations no longer ring true. Instead, they sense something else is going on, and Kevin Freeman is one of them. Drawing on his deep expertise, he took a hard look at all that America is going through, and piecing together historical evidence and current events, he made a shocking discovery. The crisis now facing America is happening according to plan. I'm blessed to again be joined by co-host Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, the founders had a clear vision of an America in which good people would flourish under a government ruled by the people, many of whom were Christians. But the threats to destroy that are quickly becoming a reality. And one current issue that's especially concerning is central bank digital currency.
There is a global plan, and I think one of the things that COVID taught a lot of us is that this plan has been going on for quite some time. In fact, Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, wrote a book called COVID-19, The Great Reset, talking about how COVID-19 could be a basis for the Great Reset. And what he's thinking of as a Great Reset is resetting the planet to a socialist, Marxist economic model so that there is a centralized control. Central bank digital currency would be one of those ways to control. The World Health Organization would be another way to control. Everything comes under the rubric of health and have this one world centralized government. The more you have some centralized entity, whether it's the WHO or central bank digital currency, whether that's in the United States or in other countries, or a central global bank that everyone participates in, the more that you concentrate power, the easier it is to go to those sources of power and then to control the masses. And that's what people like Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, people like Bill Gates and his ideology and agenda, George Soros and others like them, globalists, are doing. And it is according to a long thought out strategic plan that was going on long before COVID, through COVID, and is still going on until they ultimately reach their objective. And they'll reach that objective if we are ignorant of what they're doing, and or we know about what they're doing and we are complacent and don't do anything to protect our freedom.
Amen. Amen. The goal of every episode of Freedom Alive is simply this: to share the truth with God's kids, especially when it's hard to find that truth or when others are not telling you that truth. So we work really hard to do that, to bring you hope, peace, light, and truth with every episode. We are delighted to have Kevin Freeman back for a second episode. But up next is our Freedom Alert.
Pharmacies cannot violate state laws with the abortion pill. This is Matt Staver, co-host of Freedom Alive. Despite federal and state law, 70 senators and members of Congress and 14 governors sent letters pressuring major pharmacy chains to start distributing the chemical abortion drug mifepristone. Since the Roe and Casey abortion decisions were overturned a year ago, the Biden administration and pro-abortion officials have scrambled to make the abortion-inducing drug very accessible. The FDA changed its regulations on distributing mifepristone, which allows retail pharmacies to sell them after a certification process. But many have yet to start. These pharmacies are paying attention to state laws and ongoing litigation in the courts. In February, 20 state attorneys general issued letters to the pharmacies saying that distribution of chemical abortion drugs would violate the federal Comstock Act, as well as many pro-life state laws.
Up next, Matt's interview with Kevin Freeman.
I'm very pleased to welcome my very special guest and friend, Kevin Freeman. He is an expert in economics, and particularly economics used in warfare. He's a specialist in economic warfare and financial terrorism, and his website is economicwarroom.com. But Kevin, you have just released a new book, According to Plan. Tell us about what's that book about, and why did you write it?
Yeah, the book is According to Plan, and you can find it at accordingtoplanbook.com. And I wrote it because there are very real enemies of the United States, and they're the elitists. They're the pigs from Animal Farm, and they have an intention of removing America as the one obstacle to their global control. And the elites are either World Economic Forum or the Marxists here in this country or Communist China. But they are a threat, and right now they're running things, and people need to be aware.
I think people need to really be aware of this threat, and sometimes we go about our lives and we don't realize how serious the threat is. You know, there's lots of things going on. I think one of the things that I began to realize during COVID is that there has been an ongoing collaboration of a lot of different sources in the pharmaceutical companies, in the World Economic Forum, those kinds of individuals with different ideologies that do not reflect or are not founded upon a Judeo-Christian ideology or worldview, that have been planning, working, and striving to do exactly what you're saying, according to plan. I was just telling my wife recently, it's interesting how some people that are politically liberal and have billions of dollars, they have a plan, and they stick to it, and they will fund that plan. And particularly, I'm thinking of Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, Bill Gates with his plan, billions of dollars. They have a plan, they stick to it, they fund things, they create things to create more money to fund more of their agenda. Where sometimes conservatives or even people of faith, they will hit and miss, and they'll start something and they'll stop, and they'll go into something else and they'll do something else. But there has been an ongoing concerted plan, and let's talk about the World Economic Forum. That is your area of expertise, is economics. That particular WEF with Klaus Schwab has had and does have an ongoing plan to literally destroy America and destroy the free economic system.
Yeah, well, first, let's talk about Klaus Schwab. I'm sorry, he's Dr. Evil. You see him, you put a cat in his hands and have him stroke it, he's Blofeld, or he's Dr. Evil by on the Austin Power movies. He just looks and sounds like that. And I don't mean to say that lightly. When he lays out his plan, and they do, the World Economic Forum website publishes it. You'll see articles written in Forbes and other places that they've written. It is just like a Bond villain explaining how he's going to blow up or blackmail or control the world. They tell you everything they're going to do. So they put out a video that says by the year 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy. You'll eat much less meat. All of these things are in a plan. And Bill Gates and Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden and so many of our politicians, both left and both Republican and Democrat, have bought into this. We've got to change the world in a great reset to make everybody line up with what we think is right. Now, all of us, we're the serfs, and they'll be the elite running things.
In fact, just before doing this program, my wife, Anita, sent me something that was trending on Twitter, and it was Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum talking about how the leaders of different countries, like the Prime Minister of Canada, the President of France, Macron, and many others in Europe, they've all attended as youth their youth training program. And so their governments are full of people who subscribe to Klaus Schwab's perverted, distorted view of the world that have been trained under the World Economic Forum ideology.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's you give me the youth and I'll control the future. That is all great dictators, all people who've aspired to control the world for their own personal purposes have all had that notion or idea. Tear down the family and control the educational institutions. So the opposite of that would be if you went to Rick Green's Patriot Academy and you learned how the Constitution worked, then those people are out fighting in state legislatures and other places for liberty liberty and the Constitution and biblical values, but they're training the world's elite. The problem is the world's elite elevate the world's elite. And so people running most of the world's nations, most of our governments have been brought up by George Soros or Klaus Schwab or Bill Gates into this globalist economic forum idea where the elites are the pigs from Animal Farm. And I use the term in the book very directly. I call out our leaders pigs. And I prayed over that long and hard, because when you call somebody a name, that's a bad thing biblically, and you don't want to do it. And Paul said, "You whitewashed tomb," to one guy that walked past him. And they said to the Apostle Paul, "Wait a minute, don't you know that's the high priest?" And he apologized. He said, "Because it is written, you shall not speak ill of a ruler of your people." And I'm like, Lord, how can I talk about pigs here? And then I was reminded, those who serve in Congress are not our rulers, they're our servants. Mm-hmm. And it is perfectly acceptable to call out a wicked servant. So I call them pigs right there in the book.
Well, Klaus Schwab wrote a book called COVID-19, The Great Reset. And essentially what he's saying is that COVID-19 gives the opportunity to do the Great Reset. I want you to talk about the Great Reset in a few moments. But, you know, when we look at the economic damage and the personal damage and the loss of lives that happen because of these draconian, frankly, unconstitutional policies that were imposed in America and just around the world, lockdowns. I mean, we've never isolated the healthy. We've isolated or quarantined those who are sick, but not the healthy. When you do that, it's completely contrary to decades of pandemic preparedness. And then we rushed to market the COVID shots. And then we did propaganda that it's safe and effective when they knew that that was not true. And this happened around the country and around the world. And they then classified certain businesses and activities were essential, like abortion and big box centers, but certain activities were not essential, like going to church and places of worship. Those were not essential activities. And as a result of that, there are businesses that are no longer in existence, family-owned businesses that economically collapsed. There are people who lost their lives because of this isolation. There are high school kids that were in their last year of athletics. They committed suicide because they were so focused on their last year of athletics, and then they got isolated, and tragically, the stories are across the country where these young boys particularly committed suicide. But for these individuals like Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates and others like them, instead of looking at that as a very negative, we don't ever want to go down that road again, they looked at it as a positive. Why? Because fewer people were on the road, and therefore there was less carbon emissions. And their whole goal is to have zero carbon emissions and reset the society. And to do that, you have to build a Marxist socialist society, reduce human population, because in their world, the greatest threat to survival, at least in their ideology, is the change of the climate. And they want to get it to zero emissions by 2030, WEF, or 2050, Bill Gates. And so that great reset is something that is pervasive in these individuals, Klaus Schwab just simply being one of those global leaders.
Yeah, there's no question. And it's a massive global power grab. They got involved in between a doctor and their patient. So a doctor says, I think this drug would be good for you to help solve this problem. And no, the government says you can't do that. So they got involved between a doctor and a patient. But they also, as you mentioned, on this whole notion of net zero. The point of net zero emissions is to force old industries out of business, like the energy and oil industry, and force in new industries where they have control and the Chinese have control, like solar and wind and electric cars with lithium batteries that's mined in China. Plus, then they have this whole net zero notion. We'll take over the public lands and we'll turn them into carbon captures so that you can't use your property, and we'll make it public land. And by the way, we'll charge you for not building on public property, because that will be a carbon offset. It is a massive power grab scheme. It is literally economic warfare to take from the masses of us and give to the elite so that we own nothing, but the elites own everything, and then we lease or rent from them as if we're working for the company store. That is the bottom line. It is what Karl Marx wanted. He had no idea whatsoever about creating equality. His intention was to make him the most elite. All animals are equal. Some animals are more equal than others, as Animal Farm says by George Orwell. He wanted the elites to be he and his buddies that controlled everybody else and literally take over the world. And that is exactly what the World Economic Forum is pushing as well.
Well, when you begin, as Bill Gates does, with an ideology based on Darwin and evolution and social Darwinianism, and therefore you look at evolving the human race to be a better human race, they look at it like a garden. You want to grow tomatoes and you want to grow fruits and vegetables in your garden. But now you have these weeds that pop up in your garden, so you need to pull those weeds out. And there's certain weeds of people, categories of people, that they consider less human, less dignified, and that are pulling down the human race. And that's what Charles Darwin did in The Descent of Man. That's what Adolf Hitler ideology was. That's Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. That's the ideology of Bill Gates. That's the ideology of Klaus Schwab. Displacing God as our foundation and center, putting man in the center, and then taking control of other individuals to manipulate them and even eliminate them so that the some population segment that they prefer can survive. One of the things we talked about in another program that we did with you is a central bank digital currency. This kind of idea of a central bank where you have a central bank, not private banks, you have a centralized government bank, and everything is programmable. All of your money is programmable. And therefore, with a touch of a button, a keystroke, they can take away your money, they can add to your money, they can make it more valuable, less valuable, they can veto a line item, and so forth. They're also moving in that direction as well.
Yeah, no question. And the social Darwinianism that you mentioned, it used to be, well, I'll look at your skin color and you're inferior if you have come from a different nation or country or whatever. Now they're defining it by thought. If you think these wrong thoughts, then you're inferior. If you believe in the God of the Bible, you're inferior. If you believe in family, you're inferior. And so it is thought driven. And then their enforcement mechanism becomes the central bank digital currency. So if you said the wrong thing on the internet, PayPal even said this, if you used hate speech on the internet, we'll just take your money away from you. We'll just make it no good at PayPal. Well, they backed off from that when there was a lot of public pushback, but central bank digital currency would give the government the ability to monitor everything you're doing everywhere. And if they don't like the way you're living your life, they'll have a reward and punishment mechanism by turning your money on or off, allowing you to buy or not buy, and allowing you to determining what you can buy, where you can buy, how you can buy. That will be like B.F. Skinner, if you studied psychology, training the rats to hit the button so they could get a pellet and not an electric shock.
Well, you mentioned earlier about by 2030, this was the WEF, World Economic Forum, did a video, and it was focused on the year 2030. And it starts off with some young person happy, smiling, that it's the year 2030, and this is what will happen in the year 2030, that you'll own nothing and you'll be happy about it. And what their idea is, it's really hard to conceive and fathom from our perspective, but this is what they think, and this is the plan that they are pursuing. This is why you wrote that book. That by the year 2030, Kevin, you're not going to own anything. Everything that you've got in your background right now, the books, you won't own that. If you have a book there, it's going to be leased from the government. The shirt that you have on is not going to be yours, but it'll be leased. You'll pay a leasing fee. The dining plates that you have in your cupboard, in your cabinet, those will not be owned by you. They will be leased by the government. Everything will be leased, and therefore that lease can be terminated by the government. You own zero. It's hard for us to even comprehend a world like that. But that's exactly the world, that's the exact plan that people like Klaus Schwab and others like him are planning for all of us globally.
Yeah, no, there was actually an op-ed that was written in Forbes magazine. It was about 2030. Ider, I can't remember the last name, wrote it, and it was the World Economic Forum plan. Hey, I remember I used to own my house. Actually, I just lease where I live, and it's not even mine. It's shared living space so that when I go to work, people have business meetings in that location. And if I need a car, I don't own a car. Why would I want to own a car? I just, go on my smartphone and say, I'd like to lease a car for 2 hours or 4 hours, and then I lease the car and I drive where I need to. I cook at home sometimes, and when I do, they show up, a delivery shows up by drone and drops off cooking utensils and the eggs and the flour and the things that I need. And then when I'm finished, I send them back because everything's shared. And I never leave my 15-minute city, and I'm watched all the time. They watch everything that I do. This is written in Forbes. They watch everything I do. Gee, I hope they don't use it against me sometime. I kind of miss privacy, but oh well, I'm overall pretty happy. That's it. That's their plan.
It's hard for people to even comprehend that because it seems like fiction. It seems like some outer space story that somebody's making up. But they're actually publishing this. They're putting out videos. Exactly what you're saying. And you said they're publishing this in the Forbes magazine. They're not hiding what you're talking about. This is out there for anybody to be able to investigate themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you want to read the plan, go back and read the dystopian novel Brave New World, written by Aldous Huxley, which describes almost exactly that. In fact, in the Forbes article, she talks about how there are some breeders that live outside of the cities. They live in these suburbs, and they're really less human than the rest of us. And I wish that they would understand what we're doing and how good it is. But they live off in the suburbs, and they raise their own children and things like that. Whereas in this Brave New World, those children are all raised by the state. Sex and childbirth and family are completely separated because they want the children raised by the state. The concept of family is evil. They want individuals that are isolated and lonely and dependent on the state. And that is Brave New World. Plus, you have all the drugs you want, which is like passing medical marijuana laws everywhere. Hey, you're feeling a little depressed today, just smoke a joint. Well, in Brave New World, they called it Soma, and you would just take that drug, and then you'd go to work for the state. Everybody did, and you'd go out with friends. It is exactly Brave New World or Animal Farm or 1984. All these dystopian science fiction novels are being played out in real time in front of our eyes.
Well, and just in the few more moments of our program, we've talked about central bank digital currency, and we did a whole program with you on that, where there is this push in the United States by the Biden administration, and certainly it's a global push as well, to go to a cashless society where there is a central government bank that can control all of your spending, including instituting a line item veto over specific things that you spend or where you give your money, which is a real threat to freedom. That's essentially a bloodless revolution, because once that happens, they have total control over you. The government does, or other governments. But in addition to that, I know people like Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates certainly is working really to set up a one world government with the WHO, the World Health Organization, to be able to have not just advisory authority, you can take it or leave it, but binding legal authority on all of the nations of the world that are part of the WHO, about 194, 196 nations. In just the last minute of our time together, what word of encouragement, advice, action point would you give our viewers?
Well, every year I try and read through the Bible once or twice. The Bible has a plan too. God's plan will reign supreme. Those who are planning these things here and they're wicked, they will perish. But it is the plan of the Lord which ultimately succeeds. So we need to put our faith and trust in Him.
There's been worse times in American and certainly world history. I remember some of the stories in the scriptures. Esther, the Exodus, seemed impossible, but with God all things are possible. So God birthed us for this moment, and it's the most exciting time to be alive. Thank you, Kevin, for being our guest on Freedom Alive.
Thank you, Matt. God bless you.
Matt, I thought the point you made about billionaires plan their work and work their plan relentlessly.
Yeah, you look at billionaires like George Soros, Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates. They make billions of dollars. They create companies that actually generate billions of dollars, and they take that money and turn it back into achieving their objective. But the difference, I think, with some of those that are off the grid of our worldview, and they have a liberal agenda, an anti-God agenda, is that they stick with a plan and they continue to push forward to that plan long term. They have a strategic plan that they put in place. Oftentimes, and too often, frankly, people that are wealthy, billionaires even, that are Christians or conservatives in their political thinking, they are kind of hot potato type of people. They will start something and then they'll start something else. They'll start something that becomes a little bit too hot, so they jump over to something else. Instead of having a concerted, ongoing plan that is generational in scope, oftentimes it's more focused on a short time frame to turn around or have a result in a short time frame. What you see happening with Schwab and Gates and Soros and others like them is a globalist plan that's been in existence for decades. And we saw that, for example, during COVID. How did all of these world leaders jump onto the same page and jump off of the typical pandemic preparedness that had been around and known for decades to go into this draconian lockdown model? And they all began simultaneously singing off the same song sheet. It's because there had been an ongoing strategic plan to put this in place for global control.
Mm-hmm. And there are many examples of that, really, right? I mean, World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, and the way that's being leveraged and manipulated by these same folks.
Yeah, that's right. If you go to the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab was talking in a video that I saw. He was on stage and he's being interviewed. He was talking about how some of these global leaders in Canada and Europe, France and some of the other European countries, they've all gone through his youth training program. And so they have been doing this for some time, training in these very liberal, Darwinian type of ideological worldviews that does not respect human dignity, that does not respect or centralize God in our lives, but puts our own existence as the center, man in the center. And those are the individuals. I mean, that's why you see policies like what happened in the truckers' protest in Canada. Yeah. And the Prime Minister there, Trudeau, cracks down on these individuals.
Exactly using these principles.
Using the exact same principles that Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum would use and
shut
support.
It down.
Shut it down because they have no respect for individual human rights.
It was unreal. Well, in closing, remember Galatians 5, verse 1, which says, "It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. So join us here next time where you will hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.